matters.
Hello students. Now let's talk about the Russian Revolution, the legacy here. Now this is the last topic of this chapter, students. Before this, we have learned a lot of things about the Russian Revolution. Now if you try to remember, let's have a brief recap of what are the things that we have read in Russian Revolution. Now we talked about the scenario in the Russian society. We also talked about the Tsar. We talked about the causes of Russian Revolution, the October and the February Revolution, right? And what happened after the Russian Revolution, in which we talked about the formation of USSR, and likewise we also talked about the collapse of the USSR. Now in our last topic only, students, we were talking about the collapse of USSR. And when did it happen? So it happened in the year 1991. Now when was the USSR formed? So it was formed somewhere around 1922. Now there were various changes that happened during this period, right? So you have learned a lot about the Russian Revolution and the immediate consequences of the revolution. That who took the power? Bolsheviks took the power. So reading about the Russian Revolution in totality here, we understand that there were many features that we can take right from this whole revolution. The legacy that we are talking about, it means that what are the things that we can endure or in the coming generation we can learn about from the Russian Revolution. Now before this, students, you have learnt about the French Revolution. We talked about the legacy of French Revolution as well. Now if you remember, there were three watchwords that we learnt about the French Revolution, right, from the French Revolution. So equality, fraternity and liberty. These were the three watchwords. Here in Russian Revolution, if I ask you what is the basic thing that you learnt about, what are you going to answer in that? Yes, you can say that you have learnt about socialism. You understood the ideology of socialism in practice here, right? So in French Revolution, you learnt about this whole ideology. When we talked about the isms, it means that we talked about what were the new ideologies that came up after the Russian Revolution, right? French Revolution. So here we see that socialism as an ideology was now put in practice in Russia, right? So when we are talking about socialism, it means that we are talking about the collective ownership, the whole ideology of collective ownership that was against the idea of private ownership or private property, let's say, in general, right? So let us understand one by one that what are the legacies that Russian Revolution has left behind, right? So the collapse of the USSR was a serious blow to the communist ideology. Definitely, students. Now we learned about the collapse of USSR and various reasons that were responsible for it, right? It happened in the year 1991 and definitely it was a serious blow to the communist ideology. Why? Because there were popular revolutions now that shattered communism as an ideology in different parts of Europe, right? So the whole communism as an ideology here, when we are talking about the Central Europe and the Eastern Europe, we see that the whole ideology has been shattered, right? So here we see that communist ideology, now this was somewhere in decline. But nevertheless, Russian Revolution has taught or brought about new ideas all over the world that have been followed. And when we are talking about our country, India, we see that this whole ideology of communism, it also came to our country as well. Now, USSR gave the model of centralized planning. Now, there are many historian students who again think that it is the greatest hoax of the 20th century. The whole idea of communism here in Russia was the greatest hoax of the 20th century, right? So, but we cannot agree with this fully. Why? Because there are many things that we are going to learn from the Russian Revolution. So it also gave here the model of centralized economic planning. Now, if you remember, when we were talking about Joseph Stalin, we have learned about the 5-year plans. A centralized economic planning that was adopted during his rule, right? So the 5-year plans, it proved to be somewhat successful here in Soviet Union, right? So here through Russian Revolution, we see that this model of centralized economic planning was now adopted. Okay, so in our country also, I gave you this example of the Planning Commission that was there, right, in 1950-52 that was formed here, but today it has been replaced by Niti Aayog. Okay, so that's another part here, just to give you an example. Okay, so this model of centralized economic planning, this is one thing here that we get from Russian Revolution. Apart from this, communism came as a warning to exploitative capitalist societies. Yes, students. Now, the whole idea of communism, it was against the capitalism, right? Against the whole notion of capitalist society, where these capitalists, they own big enterprises, they own big businesses, and who is going to suffer in this whole scenario? It is these workers who are working day and night, but they are not being paid as per their work done, right, students? So, these people, they fought for the workers, the situation that they were put in. Again, when we talk about this point here, you must remember that we have talked about right to work that was constitutionally recognized in the Soviet Union, in Russia, right, students? So, right to work, when we are talking about that, it means that all the people who are the able-bodied people who can work, who are fit and healthy and have the ability to work, the government, they cannot deny them the right to work, right? So here communism, this was an ideology that challenged the capitalist society. Now all these capitalists, they had to see that the workers who were working under them, they were given good wages and the condition of the workers here, it was also good, right? So this also changed everywhere. This was another point in the legacies that we are talking about. The next point here is that right to property was balanced with social security measures on the part of the state. Definitely, students. So when we are talking about communism, we see that right to property was another important feature here, that everyone had the right to own. They were against this whole idea of private ownership, right? So they began this whole concept here of collective ownership, right? So it was being opposed by some of the individuals, but in Russian Revolution, we definitely see that it was applied, right, in practice. The whole idea of collective ownership, where the workers and peasants, everyone, they had to give their share of work, and based on that, they are going to earn their wages. Okay. Now, communist parties here were formed in India and Great Britain. Yes, students. Now, when we are talking about communism as an ideology, we see that it spread to different parts of the world. And this idea here, it was again spread to our country as well. So, in India also we see that the whole idea of communism was being spread and people, they got influenced after the Russian Revolution. Okay. So, the Communist Party was again formed in India also. The Bolsheviks, they encouraged the colonial people through throw off the yokes of slavery. Now, this is a phrase here, yokes of slavery. It means that to take them off from the bad situation. Slavery, it means that you all know that India was under the colonial rule, right, under the British Empire. So, Bolsheviks here, Bolsheviks, you can define them as the Reds, right, and who was the leader? Vladimir Lenin was the leader, the most popular leader of the Bolsheviks, right, students? So, they were always in favor of revolution, right? So, therefore, they encouraged all these people to throw off, to vanish, to make themselves free from this yokes of slavery, from this whole bad situation, they should try to come out, right, through this revolution. So they were being encouraged by the Bolsheviks. Okay. Now by the Second World War, USSR had given socialism a global face and world stature. Yes. Now we see that Russia also participated in the Second World War, right? So it participated from the allied groups here, allied forces. Okay. So we see that socialism as an ideology, it gained popularity during this World War, right? After the Second World War that happened between 1939 to 45. Okay. Now, like I told you that communist parties were formed in different countries here. So in India, by 1925, the Communist Party was formed, and many national leaders from India, they were very much influenced by this whole ideology of communism, such as when we are talking about the great leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru, he also came and visited Russia, and also he was very much influenced by the whole ideology that he was trying to put in practice in India as well, right? So all these ideologies that we are talking about related to socialism and about the whole scenario that happened during this period, during the Russian Revolution, we see that it has been inculcated by people living in different areas all over the world. So definitely students, we see that if through some ideology they wanted to challenge the government, they did it. Communism, it became a very big ideology. Now in today's day, we see that all the people who have been influenced by this ideology, they are following it and they put in practice, right? In our country as well, you can see the Communist Party of India, though it has been divided into two different segments, but still they are very much active in day-to-day politics, right? So here we see that definitely Russian Revolution, it has left on a legacy, and the generations after this, they have now followed or they were influenced by this whole ideology here that popularized during this revolution. Now coming to the question section here, we have one question that is, discuss the legacy of Russian Revolution. Now in this whole point here, we have talked about the legacy of Russian Revolution. So going to this part again, I will just highlight the important points that you can mention. So definitely you can talk about the model of centralized economic planning. This is the first legacy here. And if you want to give the example, you can give the example of 5-year plans. The second point that you can talk about is that it came as a warning to exploitative capitalist society. This is the second point that you can mention. Right to work was constitutionally recognized. Third point here is right to property. Again, that was balanced with social security measures. This is the third point that you can mention. And related to this, you can also mention that what was the impact of Russian Revolution all over the world. So yes, communist parties were being formed in different countries. So in India, in 1925, Communist Party was formed. Many leaders were influenced by the ideologies, and you can give the example of such leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru, right? Apart from that, Bolsheviks, they also encouraged the colonial people to throw off the yokes of slavery, right? And USSR, it also had given socialism a global face and world stature. Now, all these points that I have explained you here in this topic, you have to mention these points, that these were the legacies of Russian Revolution. So, this is how you are going to answer this question here, students. Now, this is the complete answer. Now, we have completed this chapter, that is the Russian Revolution. We have talked about a lot of points here. We have talked about the autocracy in Russia. We have talked about Tsar Nicholas II. We have talked about the 1905 revolution. Then we talked about the February Revolution, October Revolution, and the period between them. What happened after the October and the February Revolution? We have learned that as well. We talked about the great leaders here during Russian Revolution. That we talked about Lenin, then we talked about Trotsky, we talked about Joseph Stalin, who became the popular leader after the death of Lenin, right? So these are some of the important points that we have learned in this chapter. I hope that all your points have been clear through these lectures here. So thank you very much.